Welcome to the deep dive. We've got a really focused mission for you today, specifically aimed at helping you prep for that big EU law oral exam.
That's right. Because when it comes down to it, examiners often zero in on two, well, fundamental things: the institutional setup,
Yeah.
Article 13 of the TEU, and then the core principles that kind of guide how those institutions work.
Exactly. So our job here is to take all that sometimes dense material, the 7 institutions, the 4 main principles, and break it down, make it clear, conversational, something you can actually use in that exam. We want you to know the who and the how.
Yeah, understanding the structure and the rules of the game, it's pretty much essential. That's what we're aiming for, real clarity.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Starting with the structure. Who are the main players? Article 13 of the Treaty on European Union lists them out. 7 official institutions.
Right, and this list, it didn't just appear out of nowhere. It evolved from the original communities, coal and steel, the EEC, Euratom. But the Lisbon Treaty really locked this specific group of 7 down and defined how they relate.
So let's break down maybe the big 3 political ones first, the ones really driving things and making the laws.
Good place to start. Let's begin with the European Parliament. That's Article 14 TEU. This is the voice of the EU citizens. Its members have been directly elected since '79, which is, well, a huge deal for democratic legitimacy.
And they actually make laws.
They do, but not alone. They share that legislative power with the Council. They're co-legislators. And beyond just making laws, the Parliament has this really important political control function. It can even, bring a motion of censure against the Commission.
Wow, okay. Force them all to resign.
The whole lot, yes.
Yeah.
It's the ultimate democratic check, really. It doesn't happen often, but the power's there.
Okay, then we hit that classic point of confusion, the 2 councils. Let's start at the top, the European Council, Article 15 TEU.
Ah, yes, the European Council. Think of this as the strategic summit. It's made up of the heads of state or government presidents, prime ministers from all the member states. Their job isn't day-to-day lawmaking. It's setting the overall political direction, providing the impetus for the union's development, defining priorities.
And the key thing for the exam.
The key thing in Article 15 is crystal clear. The European Council shall not exercise legislative functions. It sets the agenda. It doesn't write the laws. That's a critical distinction.
Right. So if they're setting the direction, who's actually representing the national governments when it comes to, hammering out the details of the laws?
That would be the Council, which is also called the Council of the European Union, Article 16 TEU. This is the body that represents the member states at the government level in the legislative process.
And its membership changes, right? Depending on the topic.
Exactly. It's made up of one minister from each member state, but which minister depends on the subject. So if they're discussing finance, you get the finance ministers. That's the ECOFIN configuration, agriculture ministers for foreign policy, and so on. And this council, alongside the parliament, is the main decision maker for adopting EU laws.
And that's where that complex voting system comes in, qualified majority voting.
That's the one, QMV.
Right.
It's designed to be, well, balanced. It needs a double majority, at least 55% of the member states. And those states must represent at least 65% of the total EU population.
So it balances state equality with population size?
Precisely. It stops a few large states dominating, but also prevents a large number of small states blocking everything. It forces negotiation, really. It's central to how the EU works day to day.
Okay, so that's the political and legislative core. Parliament for citizens, European Council for strategy, the Council for member state governments and lawmaking. What about the executive arm and the judges?
Right. Next up is the European Commission, Article 17 TEU. If Parliament is the citizens' voice and the Council the state's voice, the Commission's job is to promote the general interest of the Union. Its members, the commissioners, must be independent from their home governments.
And it has 2 massive functions, doesn't it?
Absolutely vital ones, yes.
Okay.
First, it's known as the guardian of the treaties. It monitors whether member states are actually applying EU law correctly. If not, the Commission can start legal action infringement procedures.
Okay, the watchdog role. And the second one.
The power of legislative initiative. This is huge. The Commission has a near monopoly on proposing new EU laws. While others can suggest ideas, the formal draft proposals almost always come from the Commission. It's a really powerful gatekeeping function.
So who keeps all these powerful bodies in line? Make sure they stick to the rules.
That's the job of the Court of Justice of the European Union, the CJEU, Article 19 TEU. Its fundamental role is ensuring that, in interpreting and applying the treaties, the law is observed. It's the ultimate legal authority, providing judicial review for the whole system.
Okay, so that's 5 main players. Article 13 lists 7, though. What about the last 2?
The final two are more specialized. You have the European Central Bank, the ECB, which is obviously crucial for managing the euro and monetary policy for the Eurozone countries. And then there's the European Court of Auditors, the ECA. Their job is financial oversight, checking that EU money is collected and spent legally and managed soundly. Important, but maybe less central to the core political dynamic we've discussed.
Right. Okay, before we jump into the rules they all have to follow, let's just quickly lock down those key institutional takeaways. Super important for your exam.
Definitely. 3 things to nail down. 1. Article 13 TEU gives you the official list of 7 institutions. 2. Legislative power is shared parliament, and the council are co-legislators. 3. The commission is unique, it's the guardian, and holds that power of legislative initiative. Get those straight.
Perfect. That covers the who. So now let's talk about the how, the rulebook that governs these institutions. Because, having power is one thing, but how it's limited is just as important.
Yeah.
The core guiding principles.
Exactly. And these aren't just suggestions. They are fundamental, often legally binding principles that act as constitutional checks. Many were actually established by the CJEU in case law before even being written into the treaties explicitly.
Okay, where do we start? Maybe the most fundamental one, the limits on EU power itself.
Let's start with the bedrock, the principle of Conferral. You find this in Articles 4 and 5 of the TEU. Basically, it says the EU can only act within the limits of the powers or competences that the member states have specifically given it in the treaties.
So the EU doesn't just have power automatically, it has to be granted.
Precisely. It has no inherent power of its own. It only has delegated power. If a policy area, like, say, managing primary schools, isn't mentioned in the treaties as an EU competence, then the power stays entirely with the member states. It reflects the EU's origins as something created by the states.
And the practical effect of that is?
The big one is the requirement for a legal basis. Because of Conferral, every single legislative act the EU passes, every directive, every regulation, must clearly state which specific article in the treaties gives the EU the authority to act in that area.
So they have to point to the exact rule that lets them do it.
They absolutely have to. And choosing the correct legal basis is crucial. If they get it wrong, or if there actually isn't a valid legal basis for what they're trying to do, the CJEU can step in and annul the act. It's a major check.
Wow, so picking the legal basis isn't just a technicality, it's a potential constitutional fight.
Oh, absolutely. The court often has to look at the center of gravity of a law. What's its main purpose? To make sure the institutions haven't tried to use, say, a more general legal basis to avoid stricter requirements tied to a more specific one. It keeps them honest about conferral.
Okay, conferral is the foundation. What's next? Something maybe more straightforward.
Well, there's the principle of legality. This one is maybe simpler because it's a general principle common to most legal systems. It just means the EU institutions themselves must follow the law.
They're not above the rules they make.
Exactly. They have to comply with the treaties, with the laws they've already passed, secondary legislation, and with the general principles of EU law, like fundamental rights. It's a basic requirement for legitimacy. Any EU action must be lawful.
Got it. Now, what about managing the relationships between the big institutions, keeping them from stepping on each other's toes?
That's where the principle of institutional balance comes in. This principle is all about maintaining the specific power-sharing arrangement laid out in the treaties. It means each institution, parliament, council, commission, has to exercise its own powers fully, but also must respect the powers and procedures assigned to the other institutions.
So the council can't just ignore the parliament's role in lawmaking, for instance.
Precisely. Or the commission can't try to usurp a power that belongs to the council. The CJEU established this quite early on. The Levers case is a famous example. The court stressed that this balance is essential to the EU's constitutional structure. It preserves the equilibrium intended by the treaties.
Okay, that makes sense for the internal dynamics. What about the relationship between the EU institutions and the member states?
That brings us to the last key principle, loyal cooperation, found in Article 4, Paragraph 3 of the TEU. This is really the glue that holds the whole system together.
Loyal cooperation. Sounds important. What does it mean in practice?
It's a two-way street, actually, more like a four-way intersection. Primarily, it puts an obligation on the member states. They have to take all appropriate steps to ensure they fulfill their obligations under the treaties. And, crucially, they must refrain from doing anything that could jeopardize achieving the EU's objectives.
So states have to actively help make EU law work.
Yes, they have a positive duty to facilitate and a negative duty not to obstruct. But it also works the other way. EU institutions must cooperate loyally with member states. And it applies horizontally to institutions need to cooperate with each other, and member states should cooperate amongst themselves to achieve EU goals. It turns a simple treaty into a genuine cooperative legal order.
It's fascinating how these principles, which sound a bit abstract, are actually the legal tools the court uses constantly.
Absolutely. They're not just theory. The CJEU uses conferral, institutional balance, loyal cooperation every day to police the system, to interpret the treaties, and to resolve disputes. They define what shared sovereignty actually means in practice.
Okay, let's quickly recap those principles then, the key takeaways for your exam prep.
Right. First, conferral. No power unless the treaty's granted. This means every EU act needs a clear, correct legal basis. That's non-negotiable. Second, institutional balance. Protects the power-sharing setup. Each institution stays in its lane, respecting the other's roles. Third, loyal cooperation. It's that mutual obligation. Member states and EU institutions must work together actively and avoid undermining EU objectives. It binds everyone.
So putting it all together, you've got who the seven institutions defined in Article 13 with their specific roles and the core principles like conferral and institutional balance that shape and limit their actions. That's really the bedrock of the EU's legal structure.
It really is. And, if you zoom out a bit, think about the tension between conferral and institutional balance. Conferral says the member states are ultimately in charge. They granted the power. But institutional balance, enforced by the CJEU, says once that power is granted, the treaty structure and the institution's roles must be respected.
Which leads to that final thought for you to chew on. Consider conferral. The EU has no power unless given. It relies on the member state's will. So what happens when a member state genuinely believes the EU has gone beyond its conferred powers with a certain law? They challenge it based on conferral, demanding the correct legal basis. And how does institutional balance ensure the CJEU has the authority to definitively rule on that challenge, potentially even against the wishes of other institutions?
Thinking about how those principles interact in real disputes using the case law,
Yeah.
that's where you show deeper understanding.
Exactly. So hopefully this deep dive has armed you well for those foundational questions. You know the players, you know the rules.
You're definitely better equipped now. Go nail that exam.